Being 6 o'clock, we'll call this meeting of the Houston County Planning Commission to order. First item of business is the approval of the agenda. It was sent to you in our packets.
I make a motion to approve the agenda as written.
I'll second.
We've got a motion and a second to approve the agenda. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Next aspect is the approval of the minutes from the August 16th, 2018 meeting.
I'll move approval.
I'll second that.
Motion made and seconded to approve the minutes from the August 16th, 2018 meeting. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Next item of business, we have a conditional use hearing. I would entertain a motion to close the regular meeting in order to call the conditional use hearing.
I'll make a motion to close the regular meeting to open the public meeting, what is it?
Conditional
Comment?
use.
I'll
Public
second that
hearing.
motion.
Motion made and seconded to close the regular meeting in order to call the conditional use permit meeting to order. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. The conditional use hearing is for Mr. and Mrs. Gilmer in Houston Township to construct a replacement bridge in a floodway. Aaron.
Read the public notice that an application has been made by James Gilmore of 245 Sather, am I saying that correctly? Sather Valley Road, Houston, Minnesota, for a conditional use permit to construct a bridge in a floodway. The applicant standing and making application is a fee owner of the described lands. A hearing on this application will be held at the Houston County Commissioners Room, Caledonia, Minnesota, at 6 p.m. on Thursday, September 13th. All persons having an interest in the matter will be given the opportunity to be heard relative to the granting or denying of said application, and this was advertised on August 29th. You have information in your packets. I think rather than myself giving the overview, since we have an expert in attendance here tonight for the purposes of providing information and answering questions, that I would suggest that we get right to that rather than my summary.
That's fine.
Would you like me to give a brief overview of the project?
Could you say your name and
Sure. My name is Brian Malm. I'm with Bolton and Mink Engineers, and I'm here representing the Gilmers for this project. Would you like me to give a brief overview of the project?
Yes, please.
Okay. So in your packet, I believe, is materials related to the project. The existing bridge is very old. It's a span bridge, timber abutments with some steel joists with timber decking. It is old, it is dilapidated, it is in need of replacement. Part of the reason that Mr. Gilmer is interested in replacing it is he actually has issues with concrete trucks and large vehicles unable to cross that bridge to do construction work on his property. So it clearly needs to be replaced. It's proposed to be replaced with a new metal arch culvert, which would replace the bridge, would have some embankment work done as a part of the bridge replacement. There would be some riprap work done upstream and downstream of the bridge to address any erosion or energy dissipation required for the flow through the bridge. But that's the basics of the proposal, is replacing the existing span bridge and timber abutments with basically a large metal arch culvert. There was a hydraulic study that was done as a part of the submittal to you. There are existing and proposed water surface elevations, as well as existing and proposed velocities that were shown in those tables. The summary of that is from a water surface elevation standpoint, there's no increase in the 100-year flood elevation related to the replacement, and there is a slight increase in velocities for the larger storm events, the 50 and 100-year storm events. And there is a kind of an anomalous stage increase at the 25-year storm. And I could explain that basically from the standpoint of we're replacing a rectangular opening with an arched opening. And the reason that that stage increase happens at the 25-year storm is that 25-year storm water surface elevation happens to be almost exactly the full flow elevation of that culvert. So at that 25-year storm event, the water surface elevation is basically just filled up that new arch culvert. The new arch culvert actually is wider at the base than the existing bridge, so at the lower elevations it has more opening for water to flow through, but it narrows as you get to the top, and by the time it gets full flow, it's actually a little less open area than the existing bridge. Okay, so that's why you see a little bit of a stage increase at the 25-year storm, because that happens to be the full flow elevation of the culvert. There's no increase in the 50 and the 100-year storm, because at those elevations, at those storm events, the existing road and the proposed situation, the stream would overtop the roadway. And when it overtops the roadway, there's a significant area for the water to spread out, and so you don't see any real impact at the 50 and 100-year storm, because the flow is overtopping the road in both of those cases. Related to the velocity increase, we are mitigating for that at the 50 and 100-year storm by installing some riprap downstream, which would help dissipate energy and control erosion. And just again related to that velocity, that small velocity increase only occurs right at the culvert. Downstream of the culvert, where the stream widens out again, those velocities would dissipate and you would see something akin to the existing condition downstream. That's probably more information you needed to hear, but that's what I have to say. I'd entertain any questions if you have them.
So the bridge on a 25-year flood would actually, the opening that you have would actually be full with the 25-year event?
Yep.
Okay. And you anticipate 50 and 100-year they would overflow the structure itself?
Yep, as it does today.
Well, that was another question for the owners. Do you have overflow of the bridge at this point? No. You haven't?
So, we often see that when we're comparing existing conditions to modeling. Okay, so what we're doing here is we're modeling storms and rainfall events based on statistical data and storm rainfall durations that are set up for us in basically statistical method. It's an engineering method of modeling storms. We often see that when we show modeled storm events and you compare them to the existing condition, the modeled storm events are often worse than the existing condition. So the fact that they may not have seen a large rain event match the modeled storm events, that's not atypical.
Okay. Well, I'm just curious to know what the rain events that we've had the last few years that you haven't seen, overflow of the current bridge. How does the current bridge opening compare to the new one, the opening itself?
So the actual, like I said, the actual opening itself, the total bridge opening from the bottom of the span to the in the existing condition is actually a little bit bigger than what we propose with the new culvert.
Oh, okay.
But again, the shape is different, so at the lower elevations we have more opening,
Right.
but at the top it narrows, and so we actually have a little less opening total than the existing condition. And that's why you see that little bit of a bump at the 25-year storm, but not at any of the lower storms.
Okay.
Brian, can you touch on permitting beyond the county, permitting with the state DNR
sure,
that may have
yes.
occurred, or through the
Yep.
wetland program?
Right, so besides this, we do have a permit through the DNR for work in public waters, because the DNR does regulate the stream. There was a wetland delineation done. There is a small area of wetland in the bridge impact or the construction zone. That has been permitted as well. The intent is to mitigate that wetland through purchase of credits from the bank. That purchase has been approved. That permit has been approved. The only remaining step would be assuming approval of the conditional use permit, and if the Gilmers proceed with construction, they would actually complete the purchase of the credits from the bank. Army Corps of Engineers permit has also been submitted, but as typical with Corps of Engineers permits, they take a significant amount of time. We have had discussions with the Corps of Engineers. It's basically they see no issues with it. They just have not run it through their permit completion process. It's sitting in the stack on somebody's desk, so to speak.
Would you be changing the flow? I mean, is the current bridge parallel, or I guess perpendicular to the water, I guess I would say, and the replacement would be as well, or are you
Yep.
gonna actually influence the flow at all?
Nope, the flow path won't change. Like I said, the opening is a little bit wider at the bottom. So right at the bridge, it's a little bit wider, but actually the stream is wider upstream and downstream, so that's really not an impact except for right at the area of the bridge.
What is the surface? Does that mean gravel?
Yeah, it's a gravel surface. Yep.
And that's what's there now?
Yep. And that's actually part of the reason too that we're putting in the arch span bridge. Right now, the thickness from the bottom chord of the bridge to the top of the gravel is very thin. Right? Doesn't have a lot of structural capacity. When we put the culvert in, that's actually getting a little bit thicker, but the top of the road's staying the same. So that's part of the reason why we have less open areas. We're trying to get a little more structure between the top of the bridge and or the opening of the bridge and the top of the road. If we were to try to mimic the opening area, actually the top of the road would go up, and that actually may have an impact on the 100-year flood event at that point. So we think this is a reasonable compromise in providing a structurally sound crossing without impacting the 100-year storm event, even though we have that little bit of impact at the 25-year storm.
The diagram, looks like it's labeled C2.01.
Yep.
Relation of Larry's question about changing the flow. It looks like there's a slight bend in the stream at that point.
Yep, as there currently is, yeah.
Is that going to affect
No, if you look at I'm looking upside down here now, but the current flow path through the bridge has a bit of a curve in it right now. So what we're actually doing is that this edge of the bridge doesn't change. We're actually widening it to the south. Okay?
Right. Yep.
So the water will now come and flow, and we're actually providing a little bit straighter path to the downstream area. You'd be concerned if we were orienting the bridge such that the flow would be pointing at a bank downstream and you'd have erosion. We're actually not doing that. We're actually helping that by sort of widening or that throat where it currently takes the curve. And then you can see this hatching in here. This is all riprap. So the banks where we're constructing here on the opening and the downstream end, that's riprap to prevent erosion, and then a little bit of riprap on the upstream and downstream side to prevent erosion. It will be a natural bottom culvert too, so the culvert itself will sit about a foot or 2 feet below the existing stream bed, and then that'll silt in, which is advantageous for fish habitat and that type of thing.
That'll just be on an aggregate base, or is that going to be a concrete base under the culvert?
It will be sit on aggregate, not
Aggregate,
concrete. Yeah.
okay. What about, do you have any idea about construction, how long it'll take? Will there be a need for a bypass?
I don't know how long construction will take. I can't imagine it would be more than 2 or 3 weeks.
I see nothing about a bypass. I don't know if there's going to be a need for, access during construction, or.
We'll have a car parked out on the county road, and we'll wear rubber boots when we cross the street.
Okay.
How about, can you build that without diverting the current flow?
So that tends to become a contractor preference question, and when he builds it and what the stream flow is. Sometimes they will divert the flow, sometimes they build it under flow. So I think one of the advantages to this type of structure is it's a little more conducive to building under flow, but we usually leave that up to the contractor to determine how exactly he wants to sequence that.
Do you provide an inspector on site that oversees the project?
Sometimes. That hasn't, I don't know, do we have any agreement for that at this point? Yeah, we haven't gotten that far.
And the edges, the slopes from the culvert and the roadside edge, I mean, that's riprap going down, all the way down the sides as well.
Yeah, for the most part, they're down near the stream, it definitely is. But like you can see here, this slope, then there's no riprap on that. So up near the culvert opening there is, but downstream it tapers off.
But where it tapers from the road and around the culvert, it's gonna have riprap
Yep.
down to the culvert and around the edges of the culvert just to prevent erosion.
Yep, there's a
Next to the
head
bridge.
wall here, and so that whole head wall area is covered with
Okay.
erosion.
All right. You kind of touched on the overflow. Is there a lot of material upstream that if you have one of those heavy 50 or 100-year floods that you have a lot of foreign material that can come down, and is this type of a structure more susceptible or less susceptible to plugging?
So as far as whether there is a lot of material upstream, I guess I don't know. I don't know if you've seen a lot building up the bridge or not.
No, I mean, there's woodland buffer on each side of the stream, old box elder trees and such. And then farther up is another residence, and the valley's quite clear. Hillsides are all put into CRP with blue stem grasses and stuff. When it flooded in 2007, there was some wash down that creek, but it came from the top of the bluff all the way down.
Did it plug the bridge?
No, it didn't, but it just washed out both approaches on the south.
Okay.
So I don't know. Do you guys have sheet 601 in your packet? I don't know if you get the full plan or not. But if you look at sheet 601, this little section here, you can see the dashed line is the existing bridge opening, and then this arch opening is the new bridge opening. So it kind of gives you an idea how much wider the existing culvert is than the bridge, and how it kind of is shifted a little bit, or wider on the one side, but lines up with the other side like we talked about on the plan view. But you can see the difference in the opening is, we don't have the opening at the top area here, but it's much wider at the bottom. So to answer your question about whether it's more or less susceptible to plugging, it always depends on what the debris is, but there is much more opening at the lower end of this culvert than the current bridge has. So you could say, I guess, at the lower flows, until it gets to the point where it is at the top of the culvert, there would be more area for debris to flow through than the existing bridge.
Not a lot you can do about that anyway. If stuff comes down, it's gonna stick.
If all it takes is that one,
Yeah.
trunk, tree, branch, or something to stick, and then everything else piles up on it, and it's over. So,
And it'll probably stick at the top because it's floating in the water, and that's pretty.
yep,
But you can't really prepare for that. You need to get across the stream, and that's
Yeah.
what you got to do, isn't it?
yep.
Mr. Gilmer, can you come to the other microphone, please? So, you mentioned that the existing bridge does not handle much in the way of weight as far as doing anything. You're gonna have a lot of concrete trucks and a lot
Well,
of,
right now, my biggest concern is just when the propane truck comes. He barely gets across the width of the bridge with his truck. Same with the septic people. So, and I have no idea when that bridge was made, but we're figuring between 50 and 75 years ago. When you get underneath of it, you can see that the supports aren't supporting anything. So that's my first concern. And then our second desire is to build a new residence on that home someday and tear down the old farmhouse.
The other problem you have is fire and rescue. You get a fire truck out there with tankers, they
Right.
won't come across stuff like that.
Right.
So,
This is funded completely by you, right?
Yeah. It's the most expensive culvert you've ever seen.
I know what you're talking about, I had to go through the same process. Yeah.
But it's got to be done if we're going to stay there, so, which we wish to do.
Yeah, like you said, you know, propane and the fire trucks anyhow, I mean, they need to be able to, I mean, they can't get there and stop.
Right.
So I would advise the board on some performance standards to consider. The first being no stage increase, and in there they're referencing the 100-year flood, and I think that the hydraulic analysis is what you would look to determine that. And I'm going to jump to the third one, and it's the zoning consistency requirement. And that these are requirements that are in the floodplain district, and it requires that the underlying district, in this case the ag district, that the use be allowable there. This would be an accessory use, the driveway for the dwelling, which is a permitted use there. And then the second one, going backwards, the second one takes us to a list of things that are required to be considered. So from the time between when I prepared your packets and now, I've re-evaluated my approach to this, and what I'd like to do is just quickly go through the things to consider, and I wouldn't need any input from the members. We wouldn't need to vote on each one of those things that are required to be considered, but later when we do the findings, you would make your findings that are required for any CUP with these things in mind. So if it's appropriate right now, I'll quickly go through those list of considerations. So the wording from the ordinance is as such: the factors upon which the decision of the Planning Commission shall be based in passing upon conditional use applications, the Planning Commission shall consider all relevant factors specified in other sections of this ordinance, and the danger to life and property due to increased flood heights or velocities caused by encroachments. The danger that material may be swept onto other lands or downstream to the injury of others, or that may block bridges, culverts, or other hydraulic structures. The proposed water supply and sanitation systems, and the ability of these systems to prevent disease, contamination, and unsanitary conditions. The susceptibility of the proposed facility and its contents to flood damage, and the effect of such damage on the individual owner. The importance of the services provided by the proposed facility to the community. The requirement of the facility for a waterfront location. The availability of alternative locations not subject to flooding for the proposed use. The compatibility of the proposed use with existing development and development anticipated in the foreseeable future. The relationship of the proposed use to the comprehensive plan and floodplain management program for the area. The safety of access to the properties in times of flood or for ordinary and emergency vehicles. The expected heights, velocities, duration, rate of rise, and sediment transport of floodwaters expected at the site, and such other factors which are relevant to the purposes of these floodplain controls. And within your reports, you have some analysis on those findings, but I don't believe that we would be required to go through each one of those individually and vote, but you should keep them in mind as you vote on the standard findings that we make.
So with regard to the public hearing aspect of this, does anybody else have any questions?
I don't know, I have a comment. I didn't write it down as I was going through this earlier today. There's some, using some wetlands and then you're compensating for them? Can you explain that?
Sure, any Wetland Conservation Act, which is administered by Bowser and the county through the technical evaluation panel here, Wetland Conservation Act requires if you're impacting wetlands, you need to mitigate at a certain ratio, and I think it's 2 to 1 on this one. I'd have to look at the permit to be sure. So there were wetlands identified, they were delineated, the delineation was concurred with, and those wetlands can be mitigated either by constructing new wetland or by purchasing credits from a bank in the service area, and Mr. Gilmer chose to purchase credits from the bank. So in the permit for the wetlands, that's all laid out. The purchase of the credits has been approved. The credits are reserved. The only remaining step is to actually basically cut the check for the credits, which doesn't happen until the rest of the permits are approved, so that he doesn't pay for something he ends up not building because of some other permit that doesn't
So
come
what,
through.
that's because you're filling in more area? Is that
Yeah, it's
is that
basically
right?
we're impacting the wetlands either by fill or changing
Okay.
the grade. So yeah,
Okay.
anytime you impact a wetland, either by removing the hydrology or filling it,
Okay,
it's kind of a goofy thing. I mean, it's a stream. It's obviously wet. The delineators go out, and if they see vegetation or that's consistent with wetlands, it's classified as a wetland. So.
so how many, was that, is it calculated in acres?
It was like 0.25 of an acre.
It's
that
pretty
right?
minimal.
It was really small because my total purchase is going to be less than $1,500. So.
Yeah, the credits, 0.0346 acres.
Less.
Okay, there's nothing we have to deal with.
No, I
right.
think there's a de minimis for that, but I think it's like 1,000 square feet, whatever. It's above the de minimis. There's a de minimis amount where you wouldn't have to mitigate, but this is over that.
Not much.
unfortunately, So, yeah. Yeah, you wouldn't believe where you can find wetlands sometimes.
Any other questions? Any other comments?
No, sir.
Hearing none, we'd entertain a motion to close the conditional use hearing and reconvene the regular meeting of the Houston County Planning Commission.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Now we would entertain a motion to discuss the petitioner's requests.
So moved.
I'll second it. Further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. First question, is anybody on the Planning Commission have to recuse himself from this issue? Second question, have any planning commissioners visited the site? Then general discussion. And the general discussion is review the findings of fact, as well as any discussions we may have with regard to the request, correct?
Yeah, we could go through the findings. I would be looking for votes on each finding.
Correct.
Though, so it might be easier to separate if people have comments or just want to note something, question something, ask for other members' input on something, to do that outside of that voting process.
I would suggest we go through the findings of fact.
So I will read the findings that are required, that are applicable in this case, and I'll be asking for a yes or no vote from each individual. If you have a reason for your vote, please state it. If your reason has already been stated by somebody else, there's no need to restate it. And if you are citing the staff analysis, you can concisely communicate that, but just by saying staff analysis. Number 1, that the proposed use conforms to the county land use plan. Bob?
I agree based on staff analysis that this meets all the criteria.
Larry?
I agree that it meets the criteria and the staff analysis.
Ed?
I also agree. Same reason, staff analysis.
Fred?
I agree.
And Jim?
Yes, staff analysis.
Number 2, that the applicant demonstrates a need for the proposed use. Larry?
I agree with the staff analysis, and the discussion clearly supports that he needs to have an improved bridge for primarily safety factor.
Ed?
I agree. So safety factor, and you just need to get across to the dwelling.
Fred?
I agree.
Jim?
Safety issue paramount.
Yes, applicant has demonstrated a need for replacement.
Number 3, that the...
I vote yes too.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah. Number 3, that the proposed use will not degrade the water quality of the county. Ed?
I think they've got it pretty well figured out, and it should be a very workable solution.
Fred?
Yes, the staff analysis is thorough on that.
Bob?
I also agree with staff analysis.
Larry?
I agree with staff analysis and the fact that, I mean, it's just, water's gonna run under both bridges, they're gonna affect it.
And Jim?
Yes, I agree with the statements already made.
Number 4, that the proposed use will not adversely increase the quantity of water runoff. Ed, is that right?
Yes, I agree with the staff analysis and also the research done by the engineer.
Fred?
Yes, staff analysis.
Jim?
Yes,
Bob?
Yes.
And Larry?
Yes, the reasons stated by Ed.
Number 5, that soil conditions are adequate to accommodate the proposed use. Fred?
Yes, it's pretty obvious that they've been very thorough in taking care of that part of the equation.
Jim?
yes, the engineering plans account for conditions.
Bob?
Yes, based on the engineers, the plans, and various aspects in 21.24 subdivision 6, which addresses some of these issues as well.
Larry?
Yes, staff analysis.
And Ed?
Yes, I agree with the analysis.
Number 6, that potential pollution hazards have been addressed and that standards have been met. Jim?
Yes, the applicant is working with the DNR as far as erosion control.
Bob?
Yes, same reason.
Larry?
Yes, staff analysis.
Ed?
Yes, I agree with the staff analysis.
And Fred?
Yes, staff analysis.
Number 7, that adequate utilities, access roads, drainage, and other necessary facilities have been or are being provided. Bob?
I agree with staff analysis that it is part of the ongoing accessibility of the road to the property for the owners.
Larry?
Yes, I agree with staff analysis. It's necessary, it's necessary improvement for this property.
Ed?
Yes, I agree.
Fred?
Yes, staff analysis.
And Jim?
I agree.
Number 8 is adequate measures have been or will be taken to provide sufficient off-street parking and loading space. That I deem to be not applicable. Any issues with that? Number 9 is that facilities are provided to eliminate traffic congestion or traffic hazards. Again, I view that as not applicable. Any issue with that?
No.
Number 10, that the conditional use will not be injurious to the use and enjoyment of other property in the immediate vicinity for the purposes already permitted. Larry?
I agree with staff, or yes. It should not affect anybody other than the property owners.
Ed?
Yes, I agree.
Fred?
Yes, the only impact will be positive to the property owner.
Yeah.
Jim?
Yes, I agree with the statements already made.
Bob?
I agree also.
Number 11, that the establishment of the conditional use will not impede the normal and orderly development and improvement of surrounding vacant property for predominant uses in the area. Fred?
Yes, staff analysis.
Bob?
Yes.
Jim?
Yes, replacement's only going to affect the applicant.
Larry?
Yeah, excuse me, yes, staff analysis.
And Ed?
Yes, I agree.
Number 12, that adequate measures have been or will be taken to prevent or control offensive odors, fumes, dust, noise, and vibration so that none of these will constitute a nuisance, and to control lighted signs and other such in such a manner that no disturbance to neighboring properties will result. Jim?
Yes, it's just a temporary disturbance.
Bob?
I agree. At 1,600 feet, it should not be a disturbance to the closest neighbor.
Larry?
Yes, I agree. It's a temporary, one-time thing. The closest neighbor is 1,600 feet away. No
Ed?
problem.
Sorry.
I agree
Ed?
also. I'm sure it's going to be a daytime project. No lights will be involved, so shouldn't be a problem.
And Fred?
Yes, staff analysis.
Number 13 is the density of any proposed residential development is not greater than the density of the surrounding neighborhood, etc. I view that as not applicable.
Agreed.
Number 14, that the intensity of any proposed commercial or industrial development is not greater. I also view that as not applicable.
Agreed.
Number 15, that site-specific conditions and such other conditions are established as required for the protection of the public's health, safety, morals, and general welfare. Larry?
Yes, I agree with the staff analysis. They've contacted other monitoring organizations, and they're doing it right.
Fred?
Yes, staff analysis.
Ed?
Yes, I agree.
Jim?
Yes, staff analysis.
And Bob?
I agree with the staff analysis plus the approvals with regard to that, again, 21.24 subdivision 6 factors with regard to the decision by the planning commission.
And It's good that Bob is referencing that, and everybody else, the conditions that we, or the factors that I read earlier, those were utilized during your decision-making process on these findings. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Should the board choose to grant the application, I'm recommending 2 conditions. The first being that the permittee shall comply with all federal, state, and local laws and regulations. And secondly, that the county may enter onto the premises at reasonable times and in a reasonable manner to ensure the permit holder is in compliance with the conditions and all other applicable statutes, rules, and ordinances.
Do we want a motion for that?
I think we
Be
would
part
take,
of our motion to
Okay.
accept the findings of fact and to
Okay.
recommend the conditional use permit.
Do we
So-
need to have a time frame for this? I don't think we do we?
what is the anticipated,
Well, there's an exclusionary period where we can't work in the stream between October 15th and April 15th. We don't have any bids in yet from the actual construction companies. The equipment, the culvert itself is that plan is not a big deal, but we don't know who's going to actually do it yet. So there's not going to be enough time to get it done this year, but we hope to be able to start right away next April 15th.
I don't know that we need one, I just happen to think, I don't know what your time frame was, so just something we could discuss and everybody be aware of what the plans are.
I think if the conditional use permit is granted, there is no time restriction on the completion of the project, is there? I mean, the cup goes with the
there
line.
actually is, and I was going to pull it up here. Let me look it up before I tell you, but it has to be put in use in a certain time, or it voids.
The cup?
Yeah, I think we'd want to be sure that we don't inadvertently allow it to void, and that it sounds like the applicant is doing his fair share of permit applications. We wouldn't want to bring him back for more unnecessarily. Let me quickly pull that information up.
Can we make it
just a
effective
second.
in the future, so that it takes off from there?
See what he says. While you're looking up that, I'll ask Holly a question. Did we hear anything back from the 300, anybody within the circle? Okay.
Okay, so the language is 6.4, and the language is an approved conditional use permit shall expire if the use approved is not commenced within 9 months. And it's my view that the planning commission could modify that timeline as you deemed appropriate.
What kind of a timeline makes sense to the applicant?
Well, if we know that the conditional use permit is going to be approved, then we can consider the construction bids. There's no point in accepting a bid if we don't get the permit. So the sooner the better, because we'd like to determine who's going to build it and be ready to go.
It said it has to commence within 9 months. We're safe. April's 4, and we got a couple to go here this year, so you're in. Right?
I would suggest modifying that to at least 12 months, because you could have some extreme rain events or something in April, May, weather may not be conducive. Depending on the contractor he gets bids from, they may
Yeah.
actually, he may get bids that cause him to choose to not start it until the middle of the summer or something like that. So
Well, actual, in the request for bids, though, there's a condition that the majority of the work has to be done by June first.
Assuming you actually get bids.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm just thinking, you should
Yeah.
give yourself some leeway.
Yeah, there's really no value to squeezing it in.
No.
That sounds reasonable to me.
And it's to commence, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So then you'd have to commence by September, or we when the board approved it, right? So
So we would entertain a motion to adopt the findings of fact and grant the conditional use permit, noting the conditions included,
Including the extension.
which would include the extension of time.
Okay, I'll make that motion.
Do we want to well, let's get the wording for this
Okay.
last
All right.
condition. The project must be commenced no later than or by, or how do we want to word that? When it's,
Then within 12
September
months of
20th.
approval.
To
No later than
2019.
the approval date by the county board. I mean, we're making a recommendation to the board.
right, and is
So the
it,
12 months would start,
Say
With the
by the
acceptance
end
of the county
of
board.
September next year.
right?
no later than 12 months after.
I think it's better to put actual date in there, isn't there? Versus,
Does it make a difference?
yeah, it's 6 and 1, half
Yeah.
dozen the other.
Yeah.
well, make
But
it-
at this point, we don't know the approval date of the county board. We
Okay.
can anticipate it, but
well, then 12 months from the approval, huh?
Should be at their next meeting, but you don't know what's gonna happen.
Do you want it to go to the next meeting? Because typically it doesn't go until like the 25th,
yeah, as we go.
unless Fred can push it through the 18th.
Pardon me?
Well, today's the 13th, and
Yeah.
typically we wait a whole week, so it would go till the
Yeah.
25th.
Yeah, we prefer, the agenda's already out,
Yeah.
so we prefer waiting until the 25th to do it, if that's okay.
Shouldn't be a problem.
No.
Yeah, okay.
So the condition then would be, the project must be commenced no later than 12 months after the approval date of the county board.
Correct.
Okay. So Larry, do you want to remake your motion?
Yes,
with-
I will make that motion with them conditions.
With that verbiage.
Yes.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second it.
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next order of business is the permit review. If there's any questions with regard to the permits, the zoning permits that have been issued?
The permits you're putting online, and those are just permits, those aren't cups, right?
Not yet.
Okay.
We will soon be, that's in the
Could
works.
potentially be cups.
Yeah, I would hope by the end of the year we'll have,
But the ones you sent are just for our review is all.
yeah, now we're transitioning, I guess, our whole permitting approach, but once we have everyone comfortable with those emails coming through, we will discontinue giving you the paper list, and you'll be notified. I think you're notified when an application comes in at the planning commission level. The county board is notified when a permit is granted.
Well, this way we're kind of more in real time.
It's real time, yeah, it's right when it's submitted, it goes to you. I don't know if any of you've looked at the body of the email much. There is a link where you can click to view this application. If you do not register within the program, I don't think you see anything.
That is correct.
Right, so if you register and let me know your username, and then you click that, then you will see everything that we have on that application. So I'd encourage you all to do that.
So we have to get a password and whatnot?
You have to, yep, yeah. it's,
I mean, yeah.
I don't need your password, I just need to know your username so I can
Okay.
give you permissions to view things.
So we just have to go on there and then it directs you to do some applying or something, or how does that work?
It's pretty simple.
But it's all online.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
right within, if you were to click on the link that leads you now to nowhere, I
Okay.
believe it would prompt you if you wanted to create an account. And if you have any difficulty, give me a call and I'll
Just the
work with you to
usual
get it.
create an account kind of thing?
Yeah, I know no one likes creating accounts, but hopefully this will be a
Okay.
long-term system we're using in the county, so it would be not one you create and then use for one instance and don't use again.
Keep track of the password.
That'd be a
Yeah, you
good
can always
idea.
reset the password like anything else too, but as much fun
Just
as
put
it
them on a
is. to-
sticky note and they go in the cupboard, that's how that
Yeah.
works.
No, it's on the bottom of the keyboard.
Nah, put on the cupboard.
There's no more discussion with regard to the review of the permits. Is there any old business?
We got one on there.
With the biggest point.
Is that under old business? Okay.
Other business.
Other business?
So the CUP that was previously passed for the Winnebago Quarry has as a condition that the permittee shall make a good faith effort as determined by Houston County to remove the sediment and debris discharged from the existing mining site. Updates will be provided to the zoning administrator every 90 days, who will report to the planning commission. So I was just going to give you some brief information regarding this tonight and anticipate giving you additional information next month. This goes back to March. In March, the permit holder, in this case Skyline Materials, wrote to Ms. Audrey Almo asking for her participation in discussions about performing the work which is adjacent to her property. They provided me with a letter that they had sent her. Then in June, I received an email from the Gosted family. That's the other property owners who are affected by this. And in it, they write to me, as of today, we still have no response from Burning Quarry regarding the cleanup of the dry run and request their blasting plans. I remain concerned they are not operating in good faith and they do not plan to respond to the MPCA notice of violation. They sent that to me. I asked if I was understanding correctly that their last contact was the prior emails that the applicant had provided me. And they say that they had communications in April and in May, that their attorney left multiple phone messages, and that they did communicate, but they had no progress was made, and that the applicant Skyline was waiting for communications with Mrs. Elmo. The Gosteds then state that our position is Ms. Elmo's issues are a separate matter from the dry run being cleaned up. And just to put that in context, the cleanup work is all on the Gosted property and not on the Elmo property. The issue is that there's potential impacts of the Elmo property from anything you do to the drainage that flows by her house. On July, shortly after that email, Skyline wrote that Gosted's attorney was going to reach out to the Elmos, and if it becomes clear that the Elmos are not willing to respond to inquiries from the Gosteds or us, we will likely complete the work without their involvement, as long as the Gosteds allow us to do so. As I've said before, the only thing worse than doing the work without the Elmos' involvement is not doing the work at all. And then Monday, September 10th, I was copied on a email from Skyline to the attorney for the Gosteds saying, "Hello, I'm following up on the cleanup of the ditch running through the Gosteds property near Camp Winnebago in Houston County. Have you had any success contacting Audrey Elmo? We'd like to get this matter resolved this fall, and I certainly hope that she can be involved in the process. Please contact me so that we can discuss the situation further." So that is what I've received when I've requested, I guess, documentation of the good faith effort that's being put forth by the permittee as required by the condition. The condition says Houston County makes that determination if we view it as good faith or if we view it as they're not acting in good faith. I think the board, I would weigh heavily the planning commission's advice on this, and perhaps next month I might ask for a resolution or something of that nature in support of work without the Elmo approval, or in opposition of work without the Elmo approval, if the work is not done by that point, so we can indicate to the permit holder how the county might move forward on it. Purposes of tonight's information is just to provide an update, however.
We are not in need of taking any action this evening.
I mean, you certainly would be welcome to, but I'm not recommending that you do so.
Can they do the work without Elmo's participation?
It's all on the Gostad
Yeah, it's all on the Gostin property, and from the correspondence we have, it appears as though the Gosteds have
then-
approved that access.
So then, why aren't they doing it?
The worry is that if you imagine we have a 500-year flood, and that Skyline has done the work, and then the next spring we have a 500-year flood, and the Almo's cabin is damaged. Their concern is that she might come and say that the damage is a result of their work. So what they were looking for is some sort of waiver of liability from her, as I understand it.
Which would explain why she hasn't contacted back, probably.
Perhaps, but I guess the alternative is the work not being done.
Right.
It's probably a lot more likely that she would sustain damage from, a much smaller event.
Because the flowage has got to be less down there with that obstruction in there.
Well, I guess I would look at it to, who's this guy from here? He's an engineer. To have some engineer endorse, or somebody that does this kind of work and say, this complies with industry standards, this is what, this is the way it should be done, so that, so that Skyline can protect themselves.
Yeah.
They'll do it, they should clean it out and say, here's this industry engineer that knows their, whoever, I don't know who the person is that can endorse, say, you gotta do this and this and this, you've touched all the bases, this is as good as it can be. If we get a 100-year flood next year, this, they did everything right. They can't be held responsible.
The trick, I think, is that they're not charged with doing a flood prevention project. They're simply charged with removing the sediment that was deposited there from their site.
Yeah.
We did have site visits with the PCA and the DNR, and I think the consensus from those agencies was that the work ought to return the drainage to its former condition.
Yeah.
And also Bruning's in-house engineer is the one who, submitted with the recommendations from the PCA and the DNR, submitted a kind of a work plan based on the input he got from them that day.
Well, and I would think that would protect them. And they got the DNR and everybody, they're saying, yes, this is where it was to the best of our knowledge. This is, and, I don't think they should be held responsible for improving it, say, it was inadequate to begin with. We put silt in there, we'll take our silt out.
Yeah.
We shouldn't be held responsible to fix
The cabin itself is in a mapped floodplain, so I think that's part of the concern, is that
Yeah.
if you're in a mapped floodplain,
That's a risk you take.
It's a risk that something could happen.
But if, you have enough people that have enough letters behind their name that said, this has been returned to original condition to the best of our ability, and
So my recommendation, I guess, tonight is that the planning commission take no action on it, and I would continue to be in contact with the permit holder, with the hope that it can get resolved with as much buy-in from affected parties as possible.
yeah, and that lady isn't gonna sign off on anything that says, I probably would say, next, you're in the middle of this and we get a rain event and my cabin gets washed away.
They're looking for her to sign off, and she's never gonna do that.
No, she won't.
If they just go ahead and make the good faith effort to clean up
Yeah, and they have enough documentation from enough
Document,
people
right.
that they did it
Right.
to the best of their ability. I think that's the best they can hope for.
Yep.
Okay. That's all I have on that.
You've got the consensus of this group. Any other communications?
How are they doing on restoring that wall or the place where it's falling apart? Have they made any progress with that?
No, I guess I'll briefly update you on that. There's another condition on the permit as approved that talks about the depths to which they can excavate. We got recommendations from the DNR that set forth what they would recommend the county use as the necessary investigation that might be needed before you do any sort of excavation there. The permit holder did some borings to the depth they want to excavate for the settling pond and for the key for the slope that goes up.
Yeah.
And they didn't encounter a transition from limestone to sand, which is what the concern is. But that is not, the borings themselves are not everything that the DNR was recommending. The applicant indicated they were going to hire a private engineer to make similar recommendations as to what the appropriate investigations might be. And at that point in time, the county would weigh both, what the DNR is saying and what the other engineer is saying, and make a determination as to what we would require them to do before they could do that excavation.
And they haven't done that yet.
No, we've followed up on that recently as well, and it's forthcoming, is what I've been told.
Have they started on the other side of the road?
They cannot start on the other side of the road until
good.
this side is done.
Good. Well, that gives them incentive to do it.
Yeah.
Anything else? Otherwise, we would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Multiple motions and multiple seconds. Any other discussion?
Nobody
really cares. Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign.
When you're as loud as this.
We are adjourned.